he's appeared in 234 episodes of Frasier. That's right, I didn't misspeak here. Casamano is in the show for 234 episodes, or 89% of the time in the series. Hello, and welcome back to Frasier Fridays, where all the salads are tossed and all the eggs are scrambled. Today, we're looking at the 14th episode of Season 2, entitled Fool Me Once, Shame on You. Fool Me Twice. This is the longest titled episode of the season and the series thus far, and the first episode out of production order this year, with production code 216. It originally aired on February 7th, 1995. With the jump in production numbers, we also saw a very slight jump in viewers this week, growing from a 21.1 million rating last week to a 21.3 million rating this week. Scrubs creator Bill Lawrence is on writing duties for a single episode of Friends this week, and helps to pull in a 23.8 rating for the freshman series, again easily besting Frasier, although suffering a decline from its prior outing. Seinfeld is also down from their prior outing. They had a double episode last week, while both Friends and Frasier were off, but even being down, nothing comes close to touching the rating juggernaut's 32.9 million viewers. I do find it interesting that, for the first time, Frasier hasn't followed the same trajectory as Friends and Seinfeld, by going up, even if only by 200,000 over its prior outing, while both more popular shows saw a decline in their ratings. Fool Me Once is the directorial debut on the series for Philip Charles Mackenzie. Mackenzie is an interesting guy and will direct 20 more episodes of the series over this season and the next season. Interestingly, he'll actually direct over 70% of the season 3 episodes of Frasier. Mackenzie is kind of a unique guy, where most of our Frasier alum either worked exclusively behind the camera or in front of the camera. Mackenzie has put in a pretty equal time into both. He got his start in Hollywood in 1975 with an acting role in Dog Day Afternoon. From there, he began to slowly build up his acting career throughout the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, with appearances in The Jeffersons, WKRP in Cincinnati, Three's Company, Cheers, Heart to Heart, and Brothers. He actually had a starring role in Brothers, where he appeared in all 115 episodes as Donald Maltby. During the 4th season of Brothers, Mackenzie tried his hand at directing for the first time, and found he enjoyed it. From there, his acting roles began to diminish, while his directing roles began to expand. He'd go on to appear in 24 episodes of Open House, and direct 2 episodes of the series, before switching to pretty much full-time direction gigs, with jobs for Roseanne, The 5 Mrs. Buchanans, Almost Perfect, Suddenly Susan, It's All Relative, and According to Jim. He completed his stint on According to Jim in 2009, after which point Mackenzie retired, minus a short film he directed, wrote, and starred in 2019 called Sizzle. Writing duties this week fall to Christopher Lloyd, and brings us to the 4th of 18 episodes the Modern Family creator will write for this series. His last outing, Flower Child, was a much stronger outing overall than this one, and based on the IMDb ratings, his next episode, the Season 2 finale, will also be one of his stronger outings. We start this week's episode out with the 4th appearance of the Elevator and the Space Needle this season, which makes it the most common introduction for the season so far, while tying it with the red blinking dot on top of the Space Needle for the most common intro in the series. We're definitely done with new introductions for the season, and we're just going to be moving into repeats from here on out. This week's episode starts out with what's going to be a recurring gag for the rest of the week, with Niles opening the door to the coffee shop for different women. Our first woman here is unfortunately not credited. She gets in a really good eye roll, which gets us a very nice and sassy "you're welcome" from Niles. Niles is understandably upset about this reaction, and his first comment to Frasier is about why this could have just happened. He then tells Frasier to smell his hands, because he's learning to be handy, and pumped gas by himself. Unless you live in Oregon or New Jersey, you probably don't think much about pumping gas yourself these days. I know I prefer to pump my own gas and will usually avoid the full service stations, just as a personal preference. Of course, that wasn't always the way of things. The first experiment in self-serve gasoline was by the Hoosier Petroleum Company in 1930, which was a 20-store chain in California. Ultimately, the California fire marshal said it was a fire hazard and quickly put a stop to it. In 1947, the first modern self-serve gas station was opened in LA, and it was a huge hit. It sold more than 500,000 gallons of gasoline in its first month, leading to a lot of other mom-and-pop convenience stores adding self-serve gas pumps. In June of 1964, a store in Colorado introduced the first gas pump that would automatically reset itself and collect the money, completely eliminating the need for a fuel attendant. Over the next 2 years, the popularity of self-serve gas stations began to expand, and by 1966, 17 states legalized pumping your own gas. In 1967, the New York Supreme Court became the first in the country to rule it was illegal to bar self-serve gas stations. A number of other states followed suit, and by 1970, 33 states had self-serve stations. Over the next 10 years, every state except Oregon and New Jersey legalized pumping your own gas. By the early 80s, everywhere except the aforementioned states had an average of 75% self-serve pumps. This means Niles has been explicitly going out of his way to find full-service stations since then, which, given what we know about Niles, really shouldn't be a surprise. I also want to point out that Niles' attempts to be handy is a nice callback to Seat of Power, where he and Frasier were on a similar handy kick when they attempted to fix Frasier's toilet, before admitting defeat and hiring a plumber. Frasier mentions that he's going to spend the night watching an Angie Dickinson movie with his dad. Dickinson is an actress that never showed up on Frasier, even as a guest caller. Although, how good would it have been for her to be the guest caller this week? She's appeared in a lot of movies and has over 150 acting credits to her name. She's not super relevant today, having had her last on-screen appearance in 2009, but from the mid-50s to the mid-2000s, she is a huge star and a huge part of the mainstream. At this point in the episode, I started taking a lot of notes about Niles and Roz's interactions. They've sniped at each other in the past, and it's always been kind of clear they don't really like each other, but they straight up lay it all out there here, and it's great. Niles starts in on Roz, and she more than stands her ground, and really hands it to him, leaving the good doctor absolutely speechless. Come the very end of their fight, Roz says she's so glad they did it, and they vigorously shake hands. This is just fantastic characterizations for both of them, and probably the high point, writing-wise, of the episode. The main plot of the episode takes off here, with Frasier losing his briefcase. He sees a man leaving the bathroom and assumes he must be the thief. It turns out Frasier's theoretical thief is actually a priest, played by Bernard Coopy. Coopy is mainly a "that guy who was in that thing" actor, but he's an interesting one. He got his breakthrough into film and television in 1969 with a recurring role on Bewitched, but that's not all. He started his professional entertainment career in copywriting work for every medium you can imagine, including magazines, television, radio, and commercials. After he landed his role on Bewitched, Coopy never managed to land more than a 3-episode recurring role again. His 3-episode role was on St. Elsewhere, but he kept really busy up until, well, this appearance. This is actually his penultimate acting role, before he appeared one more time on screen in 2003 in The Brotherhood of Poland, New Hampshire. Prior to that, he appeared in an episode of every other Frasier Universe show, an episode of Wings, an episode of Cheers, and an episode of the original Cheers spin-off, The Tortellis. He's also appeared in The Karate Kid, Heart to Heart, and Charlie's Angels. He passed in 2008 at the age of 84. Interestingly, this is actually the same briefcase Frasier usually carries in the show. We know this because it has the same stains on the outside of the case that can be seen in other episodes. As the scene ends and Frasier realizes someone else must have stolen his briefcase, Niles gets in one more good zinger at Roz, where he says it looks just like the inferior leather of Frasier's briefcase. Roz gets indignant because she bought it for Frasier, which we actually did see on screen during the Christmas episode last season. and Niles grins and says, "I know." Our first title card of the episode reads, "It's like Horatio." This is a reference to the character of Horatio from the Shakespeare play Hamlet. Given this is Frasier we're talking about, the Shakespeare reference really isn't out of place. With that said, as the scene goes on, the title card does feel a little out of place, since we don't really get a joke to go with it in the next scene. The scene wraps up with Daphne telling a story about the time she tried to be a good Samaritan and was rewarded with a note with a misspelling of the word fellatio. We've had plenty of adult content, or at least the implications of adult content on the show before, but this one surprised me a little, as it seems a bit cruder than we normally hear on the show. And I'm clearly not the only one to think so. As we wrap up the scene, we get a shot of Martin looking perturbed by Daphne's story. This is a great reaction from Mahoney, and the sort of shot that he typically reserves for his sons. In the next scene, we get a call from Frasier's tormentor, who we only hear on the phone. We'll actually see him later in the episode, but we might as well talk about him now. The thief who is impersonating Frasier is played by Nathan Lane. Now, at the time of this appearance, Lane has been in the acting world for 10 years, and was just coming off the role that he's probably best known for to this day. Lane started out his acting career in college, when he went to St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia on a drama scholarship. In the late 70s and early 80s, he found some success in the world of stand-up and off-Broadway theater, before making his Broadway debut in 1982 with Present Laughter. The same year, he landed a starring role in the unsuccessful and short-lived comedy series One of the Boys. From there, he's appeared off and on television and film, including a 4-episode stint on The Days and Nights of Molly Dodd and an episode of Miami Vice. In 1994, he landed his breakthrough role as the voice of Timon in The Lion King. He's gone on to play the character in over a dozen media projects across sequels, television series, and video games. In addition to these roles, he's appeared in Sex and the City, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Titan AE, Modern Family, The Blacklist, Penny Dreadful, City of Angels, Only Murders in the Building, and Beau is Afraid. He's still very active in the world of Hollywood, and as of August 2024, he's won 3 Tony Awards, 1 Primetime Emmy, 2 Daytime Emmys, and a Screen Actors Guild Award. I do think it worth noting that Mackenzie had one super good bit of direction at the beginning of this episode. At the 2:13 mark, we actually get a moving glimpse of Lane, as he walks by the table and grabs Frasier's briefcase. It's super short and easy to miss, but gives a lot of credibility to the idea that Frasier's briefcase was in fact stolen. Before Frasier leaves the studio to confront his tormentor, there's one bit of scene dressing I want to point out, and that's this new poster in the hall. We've seen several different posters in the KACL studio halls before, but never one with one of the female hosts. This week we break that trend and get a good glimpse of about half of it in this scene, and a glimpse of the full thing later on in the episode. Now, it's clear this isn't Roz, as 1, it doesn't really look like her, and 2, I don't think a producer would score their own poster. We've met several female talent members from KACL at this point in time, and I believe this one is Catherine Hirsch's Bonnie Weems, who only appeared in the Season 1 Christmas episode where Frasier was given his briefcase, but has been mentioned several other times in the series. Coupled with the Chopper Dave poster we got in last week's outing, I really love that this edition of cast members who won't be on the show again appearing in the hall. It feels like they're still around, and it's a great way to make it feel like the radio station is the real radio station, without having to have numerous guest stars wandering through the halls each week. We transition back to the coffee shop and get our second gag of Niles holding a door for a woman, with the same results as before. This time we do know the identity of the actress, as she'll, sort of, get some lines in when Niles confronts her a moment later. And that's Karen Persons. Persons is a pretty minor actress, with one exception. She was active in Hollywood from 1989 until 1996, starting with an appearance in Hardball and the Leslie Nielsen exorcism parody, Repossessed. She appeared in a handful of things here and there before landing a recurring role in the soap opera All My Children, as D.A. Galen Henderson, for 118 episodes. After this appearance on Frasier, she will appear in an episode of Walker, Texas Ranger, and 2 episodes of Nightstand before retiring from the acting world. We also get what I believe is the first speaking role for Paul Cosimano as the Cafe Nervosa waiter/manager. Cosimano is someone I've been wanting to talk about for a while, as I think he's one of the most interesting and underrated recurring members of the Frasier cast and crew that almost no one recognizes. Cosimano has only appeared in 4 acting roles. One is the Guns N' Roses music video for November Rain. One is a background patron in 9 episodes of Cheers. And once as a bartender in the 2002 film Hoboken Lou. On top of those appearances, he's appeared in 234 episodes of Frasier. That's right, I didn't misspeak here. Cosimano is in the show for 234 episodes, or 89% of the time in the series. With that said, he only appears as the Cafe Nervosa worker in 145 episodes. Starting in Season 3, he worked as Kelsey Grammer's stand-in for pretty much every remaining episode of the series. We haven't talked about stand-ins before, because we don't ever usually see them on screen, but a stand-in is sometimes known as a lighting double, and it's a role that never actually ends up on film, but is instead a person that is of a similar complexion and build quality to the actor, and is used as a stand-in to set up the camera for different shots, while the actor is either filming another scene or not yet on the set. It's not a role we ever really think about because we pretty much never see it in the finished production of any media project, but it's a cool job, and in the case of Cosimano, it's really neat given he also appears in the series so much as an extra, despite never having more than a few lines of dialogue per season. Frasier's first attempt at meeting Nathan Lane's Phil ultimately ends with Frasier's car getting stolen. And you know what? It's actually a pretty good scam. Yeah, Frasier was stupid to fall for it. And it might not be as sharp of a scam or as smooth as a lot of the ones we saw Harry the Hat pull in Cheers, but I love a good con, and this certainly qualifies as one. The highlight for Daphne this week comes as she drops Frasier off at work and gets a quick tour of the KACL studios. Roz asks how she's doing, and in an impression that sounds pretty much nothing like Frasier, Daphne says, "I'm listening." Frasier's catchphrase has been used more than a few times now as a joke, and it's landed really well for me every time. The writers were smart to wait long enough for it to be decently established before they started making these kind of jokes, but now that that point has been hit, they're one of the funniest and most self-aware jokes the series has offered so far. While talking with Roz, Frasier gets a phone call from a woman named Denise, who claims he went out with her last night. Now here's the weird thing. Unlike most guest callers, Denise isn't given a credit here, and no one seems to know who the actress is. One user on the Frasier Reddit suggests it was Demi Moore, but I don't think that's the case. With that said, it could be literally anyone. As with a few exceptions, here's looking at you, Fran Drescher, I can't positively identify most actors just from their voice. So, like some of the bit parts, the identity of Denise seems to have, unfortunately, been lost to the dustbin of history. While Frasier goes to confront Lane, he runs into our second-to-last guest star of the episode, with Joan McMurtry, playing a woman named Heather. McMurtry is a major "that girl who was in that thing" actress. She currently has 75 different acting credits to her name, ranging from 1985 to the modern day. Out of those 75 appearances, she's only had 2 roles where she appeared more than twice. Once with a 29-episode recurring role on Simon & Simon, and more recently with a 26-episode role on The Bold and the Beautiful. Outside of those recurring roles, she's appeared in 1 or 2 offs and a number of familiar shows, including Cagney and Lacey, Magnum P.I., Murder, She Wrote, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, ER, Malcolm in the Middle, CSI, Tremors, Psych, and The Young and the Restless. Today, she works as a professor at the Savannah College of Film and Acting. Frasier's plan works, and we finally get to see Nathan Lane on screen for more than half a second, and he's supposedly dressed in Frasier's clothes. Now, I'm not going to count this as one of Frasier's ties when we get to that, but if we were to count it, this is a new tie we've never seen before. And considering he runs off with it, I'm guessing it's a tie we'll never ever see again. Nathan Lane's character says he's upgraded Frasier's car phone and pulls a new phone out of his coat. We don't ever get a real good look at the buttons, so identification is a little difficult here, but I'm fairly certain this is the same phone that's typically used as Niall's cell phone, a Microtek 9800X. We talked at length about this in my review of Dinner at 8 when it first showed up. We get one last really good joke this week, with Lane stating that Frasier's clothes don't really fit him and he had to put staples in them, which lends to some excellent reaction shots from Grammer. As the episode wraps up, we get our final guest star, and that's James Willett as a cop. Willett is a very minor actor with only 10 small roles to his name, including a spot on Murder, She Wrote, The Pretender, and There Goes My Baby. He was active in Hollywood from 1990 to 1998. Our coda is a nice conclusion to the episode, where Niles finally gets the recognition for holding the door he's been hoping for all week, only to realize his watch has been stolen. It fits in really nicely with the scam theme we've been following all week, and nicely wraps up that recurring gag. The woman who steals from Niles here appears to be Karen Persons again, appearing for one more brief outing in this episode, which makes it even better, as he almost deserves it after how he treated her earlier in the episode. We have 3 ties for Frasier this week, and 2 for Niles. Out of Frasier's 3 ties, only 1 is new. His first tie was last seen way back in Season 1, Episode 23, and is making its 2nd appearance here. And his second tie is making its 5th appearance, after last being seen just 2 episodes ago. His third tie is a new one, and his 43rd tie overall. Of Niles' 2 ties, both of them are new here, which brings his total up to 43 different ties so far in the series as well, and really ties things up. From a historical perspective, this episode has a couple really interesting things to offer. First is obviously the directorial debut of Mackenzie, who we're going to see a lot more during the course of the series. Secondly, this is the first of very few speaking roles Cosimano will have in the series. In addition to that, it's also one of the first times we've had an actor as a full-fledged guest star, not just a guest caller who's basically at the height of their fame with Nathan Lane. And if I have anything to praise the Frasier crew on this week, it's their use of Lane. As popular as he was coming off The Lion King, they really could have milked his appearance and made him a much bigger part of the story. Instead, he slots in really nicely, he doesn't get overused, and he doesn't even really show up until the very end of the episode. Which, considering how big of a deal it must have been to land him as a guest star on the show, shows an enormous amount of restraint and good thinking on the part of everyone involved here. Beyond that, this episode is fine, with a few highlights including Daphne's I'm listening gag, the wonderful fight/bickering scene between Niles and Roz at the start of the episode, and as always the reactions from our principal cast. We also have the changing posters in the hallway at the KACL offices, which really adds to the feeling that we're looking at a real radio station with actual people working at it. With that said, there's one glaring issue I have with this episode. And that's the reaction Frasier gets from several people after getting his wallet stolen, and that's with no one recognizing him. I'm more than willing to buy not everyone would know his face, but I think anyone who'd listened to his show before would recognize his voice. Frasier and Lane do not sound alike at all, and this leading to a case of stolen identity just felt silly, and a little too out there to be taken completely seriously, even with the suspension of disbelief. This issue aside, there's nothing wrong with this episode. There's some good jokes, even if there's none that are great, and it's just a generally good time all around. Although it's really nothing like Horatio, this is a solid 7.5 out of 10 episode of Frasier, and well worth checking out, if only for the Roz and Niles bickering scene at the beginning.